Hello, and welcome to Virtual Investor Conferences. My name is John Viglotti, and on behalf of OTC Markets, as well as our co-host, Zach Small Cap Research, we're very pleased you joined us for our first presentation of the day from Gemina Labs. Their session will be moderated by Brad Sorensen. He's the Senior Equity Research Analyst with Zach Small Cap Research. Please note you can submit questions for the presenter in the box to the left of the slides, and you can also view a company's availability for one-on-one meetings through the Schedule Meetings tab found on the conference platform. At this point, I'm very pleased to welcome Brian Firth. He is the Chief Executive Officer of Gemina Laboratories, which trades as of this morning on the OTCQB venture market under the symbol GLABF and on the CSE under the symbol GLAB. Welcome, Brian and Brad.
Thank you very much, John. Let me just start by saying a little bit about who Gemina are. We are a listed company, and it's a big day for us. We've just gone live with the OTC markets as of this morning. So because we're a listed company, obviously the usual disclaimers. I would point people to our disclosures, which are now on the OTCmarkets.com under our page, or if you're in US, if you're in Canada on CSE or on CDAR. What we're talking about here is point of care testing. Point of care testing, I would say, really came into its own with the original invention of the Clear Blue pregnancy test some 35 years ago, a company I know well, having been Chief Operating Officer there before I came to Gemina Labs. By point of care testing, what we mean is diagnostics that take place at the patient. That means you take the sample, run the test, and give them the result without having to leave the patient's side. And of course, home pregnancy testing, probably the best example of that in some ways, or nowadays maybe COVID testing. The point of care market is worth about $43 billion. It splits up into three different areas. One is the lateral flow testing market. Another is molecular diagnostics, which we also heard a lot about during COVID. And the third area is really dominated by electrochemistry and therefore diabetes self-testing. The challenge with point of care is really performance. People are actually wanting point of care tests to perform like central lab tests, the big analyzers that sit in hospital central labs. And that really gives me an introduction to what we do at Gemina Labs. We are a diagnostics technology company. So if a medical diagnostic like a COVID test or a pregnancy test was a car, we are to diagnostics what the turbocharger is to the car engine. So we provide specialist chemistries that really improve the performance of point of care diagnostic tests. And to illustrate what I mean by that, if I take something like a lateral flow test and take something like a COVID test, how that test works is you spray antibody in a line. That antibody is meant to capture the antigen you're looking for and form the line. And that's why you see the pink line forming when you're doing a COVID test. The problem is you want your antibody to be like the little picture on the top left here, all standing like netball players with their hands in the air in a straight line, ready to catch the ball. In reality, that doesn't happen. When you spray it down, some of the antibody lies on its side, some of it's upside down. So it's not quite the well-regimented line of players with their hands in the air you're looking for. What Gemina chemistry does is essentially spray down before the antibody, and it flips the antibodies all up the right way. And what that does is it increases your sensitivity and therefore your performance, giving you a choice of whether you reduce the amount of antibody you use for the same performance or whether you increase the performance of your test. And we do something similar in all other areas. The way we operate is that we're actually like an IP company, and we license our technology into other people. And if you looked across our pipeline at the moment, the customers we have in our pipeline represent about 25% of the global lateral flow market as one area. And on average, we're running at about 4 cents a test in that pipeline. And a typical license for size for us is about 500 million tests per annum. So that's kind of what we're pitching at. High margin, high repeat revenue business. And really, that's where we are. We have strong patented technologies, which have been validated by the clinical industry. We've got a focused strategy, which really means we've got a sort of addressable market of about 3.4 billion plus. We're beginning to generate commercial traction with having signed our first license deal at the beginning of this year. And as I've already said, 25% of the addressable market already in our pipeline. We have a business model based on several routes to market, but generating at least 75% margins, some strong tailwinds, and a very experienced management team. And with that, I think what I'll do is I'll hand over to Brad and let him quiz me or interrogate me.
Well, hopefully it won't be that bad, but no, thank you. And yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for letting me talk to you and represent investors. Hopefully I do a good enough job. And if there are investors that have questions, like we said before, feel free to type those in and I'll get those to Brian so he can address those as well, because I certainly don't have the monopoly on good questions. I think we want to go back. This is an investor forum, so we want to talk about the financials a little bit more. Can you, like, the margins looked really good. That's what I think is very attractive about this. So can you go into a little bit about the manufacturing, the costs that go into it, how reliable those are versus variable versus fixed, how predictable those costs are, and how you see let's just start there. Let's kind of talk with the manufacturing process. Is that in-house? Do you export it? Those kind of things.
Yeah, absolutely. No problem at all. So we do our own manufacturing. And the reason we do that is, although I said we license, that's our sort of main revenue path. The way we license is we supply a core protein, a bit like McDonald's would supply the syrup. So if you wanted to license the McDonald's brand for, I don't know, Australia, you license the brand, but they supply you with the syrup, as it were, for all the drinks, etc., or Coca-Cola, rather, not McDonald's, the Coca-Cola model. You would license the brand, but they supply the syrup, the magic ingredient. We do the same, right? So we supply proteins to people and attach a license to that. And we make the proteins ourselves. That's essentially the process. Best way I could describe the process is a bit like home brewing on a sort of industrial scale. So it's highly predictable. We could do it significantly cheaper if we increase the size of the bioreactors. We deliberately choose not to do that because, of course, you increase the size of a bioreactor, you also increase the risk of a whole batch going down, and it's a much bigger batch. And of course, put this in concept, I normally have a little packet of sugar. If you think of some of those little packets of sugar you might get in a cafeteria on the side of the freeway, whatever, I think the sugar in that's about 1 cent. If you made that gold, it would be about 100, and they're about 2.5 grams, something like that. So in gold, that's about $170, $180. I used to work in drugs of abuse, so this is why I know the next number, not because I seriously. But if that was pure cocaine, that would be somewhere around $500. If it was our material, it would be closer to $250,000 to $500,000. Right? So we're talking microscopic sizes here. So it's not as if we have a problem shipping it around. It's high value, but it's very, very small. So we don't need a factory the size of an oil refinery to produce the kind of volumes we're talking about.
Right, I understand, and that's good. You keep control of the process, the quality, that is all important as well. And
it means we generate a gross margin typically around 85%.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, we don't want the headline to be that your product is more valuable than cocaine, but that is a good illustration. So the question that came to my mind when you were talking about this is, okay, so you have these proteins that go out there, and you explain the way it works. And I think that was a great analogy with kind of supercharging the way it works, the way an automobile does, because a lot of people understand that. But then the next step is for each, is there one set of proteins that affect multiple diseases or conditions, probably is a better word, or do you have to come up with a derivation of the original or continue to develop that to diagnose other conditions?
So that's a really good question. Our patent basically covers something called a dual affinity binder. So there's three components to the protein: the top, the middle, and the bottom. The top is the thing that grabs hold of your target, right? So if it's grabbing hold of an antibody, it's one type. So it's basically the same protein for all lateral flow tests. But of course, if we move to something like molecular tests where you're looking for DNA, we have to change the top end, as it were. So we do that in order to be able to go after DNA. If you wanted to go after some, bacteria, we'd have to change the top again, right? So we have to change that end. At the other end, we change depending on the material you're trying to stick to. In fact, our CTO sometimes describes us as really at the root of it, what we are is clever glue guys at a microscopic scale. We stick things together that shouldn't really stick together. But so in the case of the lateral flow test, you're normally trying to stick onto nitrocellulose. Nitrocellulose is horrible material, and it really only gets used in lateral flow by accident if you go back to history. But nobody can get antibodies to stick to paper. But Gemina chemistry does. So you can tune the bottom end of the linker to stick to nitrocellulose or to paper or to glass or to graphene or to anything, right? So if somebody came to say, look, we want to run this assay, but we want to run it on glass, we would have to tune the bottom half of the linker to pick on glass. So that's the two variables. One, what target you're going for. Other, what are you actually trying to capture that target on? And depending on what those are, we tune them.
So in theory, you can manipulate your existing for vast amount of conditions.
Yeah.
Excellent. So and then I guess, how long does it take? Like for COVID, for example, hopefully we don't have another pandemic. I mean, but people say we will at some point. Hopefully it's not in our lifetimes, but how quickly could you get a test out for something like that?
So for us to modify a linker for something is actually really quick. The guys, in fact, when we to prove the technology, we did put the technology onto a COVID test, and I think we did it in record time. In fact, it was less than 18 months from start to finish, whereas normally a diagnostic test takes years. Actually, the linker itself, the R&D team can do in a matter of months, in even weeks, right? Because it's a click and connect. It's almost like using Lego, really. They will not thank me for saying that, being a non-scientist. But they've almost got it down to that level. I mean, Rob, the CTO, is particularly good at doing that. The thing that takes the time when you look back to COVID is that actually the time that it took to get a test out is two things. One, you've got to have an antibody, right? So if you've got no antibodies in the lateral flow test, you're dead in the water anyway. But actually, we did have antibodies for COVID, right? So they theoretically could produce lateral flow tests quite quickly. But the problem is when you make a lateral flow test, there's an awful lot of optimization has to be done when you're sort of tuning the antibodies onto the nitrocellulose. With Gemina chemistry, actually, you've got the option of actually making a completely generic cartridge. And you put your antibodies into lyophilized bead. That way you can turn around new tests much, much faster in a matter of weeks, not months or years. Right? So that's really where we come into the process, is actually enabling all that.
Excellent. Yeah, that is a big plus to be able to get that out. As we've seen, I think the world saw how important it was to be able to get these things out quickly sometimes. So I guess we'll stick with this for just one more minute. So what are I guess just so people have an idea, what are the conditions your existing products can test for or get, be part of testing for? And are there future conditions that you're working on at this point in time?
Okay, so the way that we work is, in order to tune particular things, we tend to pick something that's quite difficult to do. COVID was, and then prove we can make the technology work on that. So for lateral flow tests, we did COVID. We're now working with partners that cover everything from sort of respiratory diseases right through to pregnancy to cardio tests, and beyond across different sample types, saliva, urine, bloods, etc. So there's a whole gamut there that we can do and are involved in as we partner with, companies to do that. We're also now turning our sense to molecular testing, where, of course, there it's not about capturing an analyte or an antibody, it's actually about extracting DNA. And a lot of the mobile molecular tests, when you really boil it down, is really about, can you get the DNA from an easy to collect sample, right? So if you take a really hard one like TB, what you want to be able to do, can you get, normally TB testing is done by taking sputum samples, which are horrible things to take from deep down in the lung.
Right.
We're looking at, can you actually get the DNA from saliva, right? Because then it's a very simple process, and you can take, mobile molecular tests right into the field, and that's something we've been working at now, and we've proved. I think we announced last year, and we're carrying on working and taking it into trials later this year. You can actually detect TB from saliva.
Wow. Yeah, that would be a big improvement over the existing tests, that's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so do you work with, I guess, without naming names, because I don't know that we want to do that, but who are the partners you work with in the United States? Like, are they at the pharmaceutical level, the biotech level, the retail level? I'm doubting that, but are they major pharmaceutical type companies? Just kind of a generalized, who are you looking for partners? And on top of that, do people come to you with requests asking, hey, we have this test, we need to make it better, can you guys work on this?
A combination of things. We've had people come to us who've got tests that need to meet, future FDA requirements, and saying, look, we need to improve the performance to get there. We've got people who are generally looking at the technology and saying, hang on, this means a general improvement to what we're doing. So the kind of people we work with, particularly in the States, I think the best way to describe them is, if you separated diagnostic companies into, you've got the very bigs, the Abbotts, the Danaher's, the Roches, these kind of guys. Then you've got the next tier two, which are the sort of, people that might be doing up to 500 million tests a year. They might be in pregnancy, they might be in cardiology, whatever. And then there's a big tail of lots of sort of smaller companies who'll be doing anything up to 100 million tests a year, but probably the average is around 10 or 20 million tests a year. We tend to focus on the top two. So the biggest and the sort of second tier. And we're working with people across pregnancy, we're working with people across cardiology, we're working with people across infectious disease and respiratory diseases, so full gamut. But you can probably say that they're the significant players in the US and beyond.
Right. No, excellent. Yeah, that's as general as I want to, as specific as I want to get, because I know there's some regulatory issues that we don't want to get into. So what, this sounds great. Do you guys have, and to the extent that you can discuss, what kind of growth rate over the next couple of years? Because it sounds like this is almost an unlimited opportunity, really. There's just tons and tons. Obviously, people listening to this call know there's a lot of diseases out there, unfortunately, and there's a lot of diagnostic tests needed. So what kind of growth rate are you looking at? And are you looking at what, like internationally, are you looking at other countries? What countries are you in? Are you looking at expanding? Just kind of those growth type things for investors to get a sense of.
Yeah, so we're looking at the moment, we're Europe, Canada, US. We will look beyond, towards the east. We're doing some stuff in India at the moment. We're doing some stuff in the Middle East. But ultimately, we'll will go where all the biggest players are. So that's probably going to be, the biggest ones really US and Europe, but there's some big players in South Korea. You might see us in South Korea. I don't think in the short term you'll see us in China. But
a lot of problems, a lot of issues that come with that.
I've operated in China before. I mean, it's difficult, and you have to deal with a government partner. So, but in terms of the sort of growth rates, it's really about how fast do companies, when they look at the technology, move through the various processes. And I see there's a question actually for someone just about that. And just put that into field. When somebody starts talking to us, they come alongside us looking at the technology, and then they get to a point where they want to put it into their own internal evaluation. And internal evaluation can take anywhere between 3 and 6 months. Then we get into a process of negotiating sort of development licenses, and they start putting on to real products, and that depends on the length of their product development cycle. And then you're into full license agreements for supply on an ongoing basis. So the whole process from initial sort of look-see to a license agreement can take anything up to 18 months, typically around 12, and something between 6 and 12 from the point where you're at evaluation. And we've currently, although we signed our first license agreement at the beginning of the year, we've got another 4 companies already in evaluation. So actually what will limit our growth is actually how fast can we keep up with the capacity.
Right, and that's what I was going to get to that. But I want to get back to, well, I guess let's go there actually. Do you have plans to expand capacity, or are you just like in the future and you're just getting ramped up now, like you said, but you have a lot in the pipeline. So are you already making plans to expand capacity?
Yes, very much so. And in fact, what we've done is we've the best way I can describe it, we have a sort of module of capacity, as it were, which is a specific size we think is a size that is not too risky if you lost one line, you're not losing too much. That's rare that it happens, but it does happen in bioreactors. Suddenly you'll get some kind of contaminant in it, even though you try and keep the thing completely clean. So, maybe you can expect once every 2 or 3 years a bioreactor to fail. So we've focused in on a size that doesn't increase that risk, but it means that very easily and very quickly we can add capacity onto the end of the line. And we've decided it's better to have multiple smaller reactors than one big 1,000-liter tank. It also means that we can put them in other places, right? So we can put them closer to where we need to be having the protein. Right. So you'll see us, over the next 2-3 years, adding capacity at our core plant in Vancouver, but you potentially could see us adding capacity elsewhere.
Excellent. And then you mentioned the contracts. So these are ongoing licensing agreements. So the revenue is recurring. It's not just a one-time, hey, license this. It's a recurring revenue situation.
Yeah. So the way we do it is as I said, a bit like the Coca-Cola model, what we do, we would see. Sorry, I've just lost that question.
Now, recurring revenue is what we were talking about. That it's not just a one-time licensing fee. That does it ongoing, or is it a one-time chunk?
Yeah, that's right. So a bit like I mentioned earlier on, like the Coca-Cola model. What we do is we supply the protein, and the license goes on top of that protein, and it's priced, per volume of protein. So actually, as long as they keep using that protein, and as long as they keep manufacturing that diagnostic, we keep the revenues running. So typically, if you think what happens once you've got a regulated product, you don't really want to change it because it's such a pain putting it back through the regulator. So once you're on a product, you're there for a long time. I mean, let's face it. I used to work for Clear Blue. Pregnancy tests have been the same. We've been making basically the same pregnancy tests now for about 35 years.
Well, and on that, and this will be my last question, and I'll get to some client questions. Or listener questions. I just want to talk on the regulatory, because in this space, a lot of people are familiar with the FDA can be a bear to deal with, and that can. So how regulated are you? What kind of burden is that on your operation?
Well, actually, technically, we just need to have ISO 9001, because our product's going into somebody who is putting their products through regulatory. right? So we don't actually have to carry the sort of regulatory overhead, as it were, which is one of the other reasons that we have quite a low cost operation. Does mean that we're working with customers who do, and we have to keep up with that. But actually, we do operate to good manufacturing practices. So we operate the factory a bit like it is a regulated factory, even though we don't actually have to be FDA regulated to do it. Yeah.
Right, to keep the quality where it needs to be and keep the quality control. Okay, excellent. And I think a lot of people listening that are used to investing in companies with FDA problems would be glad to hear that you're not really having those, because that is a big positive in this space. So I want to get to a couple of listener questions, and we addressed this a little bit, but they do want to know. They'd like you to speak a little more about upcoming milestones that you may see and how you see ramping up, revenue ramping for the next few years.
Yeah. So we should see. So we've actually just last week had our first revenue check in. So we're now actually generating revenues, beginning to generate revenues. So, which is a bit of a plus for a tech company, an IP company. But actually, this year we'll see relatively small revenues this year towards the end. We'll probably be talk about the end of the year, around about $250,000. But next year we'll see us doing somewhere around $3.7 million, and the following year, 10 plus. Right, that's over the next 3 years, and that's really because these big licenses, as they kick in, there's a lead into it, but we have multiples now lining up. So that's the
I'm gonna I'll put on my analyst stat real quick that that's what we call kind of you're at an inflection point, and that is always when I talk to investors, that's always a good time to start looking at a stock, because you're at this inflection point. First revenues, and I want to mention again, you just got on the OTCQB, so you're investable in the United States, much easier. So that's something to look at. So I have time for one more question. And I think this is good that people need to understand. So you mentioned two benefits of these: less antibody use and the ability to stick to surfaces. What is the impact for the licensor? Like, how substantial is that benefit to them?
Okay, so if you took just sort of antibody savings, for example, in the lateral flow industry alone, we spend somewhere around $4 billion a year on antibodies. And using Gemina chemistry, you could take 3 billion out of that. Now, that's quite a big number. Of course, when you boil it right down to an individual test, then it doesn't seem such a big number. But then the point being is that for most of these lateral flow test manufacturers who've been manufacturing the same test for a long time, they've taken all the other costs out. There is nothing left to go for in terms of reducing their costs. So the minute their supply chains here, hang on a minute, what do you mean we can save 75% of the antibody costs? They're on you like a rash, right? So that's the first thing. So it is a big deal for them. The other way is to say, if you look at something like flu, for example, the FDA is changing the requirements for flu tests from I think it's next year. And, there's a lot of people who then can't meet that requirement. So that's them out of the market. That's like no business at all, right? And if our chemistry can help them get there, then they're still in the market. So it's really significant what it can do, And then on the molecular side, we talked earlier about the fact that, getting DNA out of saliva suddenly means you can take TB testing to, First Nations in the very north of Canada or into a slum in India or wherever. You don't need to bring people to hospitals. So, quite significant.
Yeah, no, that is huge. And that seems like that would be a pretty good selling point, that, hey, you can save a lot of money by paying us a little money, and your test will work better. Hey, what do you know?
Yeah.
So, no, that's great. And I wish we could talk longer, but I've really enjoyed this discussion. I think investors should look into Gemina Labs, and I'm going to let you just wrap it up with whatever you want to leave investors with a couple of major thoughts, and then we'll say goodbye.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much, Brad, for your questioning. I actually really enjoyed the conversation. I hope we'll get to do it again sometime in the not too distant future. Yeah, I mean, the one thought I would leave with people is just imagine that we are really we're a reagent supplier, we're a material supplier that supplies into the diagnostics companies. So we could effectively be everywhere. Right, we could be the Intel inside for all diagnostics. So that's what we're really pushing for, with sort of high margin, high return. That's what we're driving for. So yeah. So
all
thanks
right,
very
excellent.
much.
Thank you again, everybody, for being here. And if you have further questions, feel free to reach out to the company. There's a way to do that through the system, or you can go to their website. They're happy to answer the questions. I know I found Brian very helpful when I've talked to him in the past. So feel free to do that. And thank